This sad dog was waiting for his owner for 11 years. See what happens next. Most of us probably know of the incredibly sad film Hachiko, where a dog waits for years for his owner to return home to him. Well, this story is another real version of that incredibly heartbreaking tale, and it's set in Russia. In the town of Tobolsk in Russia, many of the locals will gladly tell you the story of the loyal wolf dog called Mishka. The canine had originally led a very happy life with a loving owner who did everything he could to make sure that his pup was safe and loved. Every day, Mishka and his owner would go on a walk along the road to the park before making their way back home again. One day, the two were out on their walk when all of a sudden, Mishka's owner fainted. The dog became sick with worry and began to bark constantly. He eventually attracted the attention of some people walking nearby, and they were able to call an ambulance for the sick man. It didn't take long for help to arrive, and the young man was whisked away in the ambulance and rushed to the local hospital. Sadly, in the panic and confusion, the wolf dog was left behind on the side of the road. Unbeknownst to the canine, his owner sadly did not make it and passed away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Later that day, the owner's sister returned to collect Mishka from where he had been left and was surprised to see the dog simply sitting where his owner had fainted. It was almost as if he was waiting for his owner to return to him. Feeling overwhelmingly sad for the animal, the woman approached him and picked up his lead before trying to move him away and back to her home. However, before she could get too far, Mishka began to pull on his lead. He wanted to go back to his spot on the street and wait for his owner to come back to him. Heartbroken by what she was seeing, the woman simply picked the dog up and put him in her car. She knew there was no way to explain to the dog what had happened to his master, and she hoped that after a few days the canine would simply forget and move on with his life. However, it seemed that wouldn't be the case. The next morning, the woman woke up only to find Mishka missing from her home. She searched everywhere for him, but could not find him. Suddenly, she noticed a window that wasn't fully closed. There was a gap that was just big enough for the pup to squeeze through. Worried that Mishka had run away and possibly gotten hurt, the woman immediately jumped into her car and began scouring the streets for the animal. She eventually found the canine back at the spot where his owner had sadly passed away. She tried to get the dog to move, but he simply refused and even growled a little when the woman got too close to him. Not sure about what she could do, the woman sighed and went back to her home, leaving the canine by himself on the street. For the next couple of days, the dog stayed on the street, waiting for his owner, who would sadly never return. Many of the local townspeople recognized the animal as the pet of the man who had died, and some even tried to take him home and adopt him. But every time, Mishka would simply escape their homes and head straight back to the street. This loyal dog's mind was made up. He was going to wait for his deceased owner, no matter how long it would take for him to come back. After realizing that the canine would not be moved from his spot, many of the local townspeople began to help him in other ways. They would make sure to drop off food and water for the pup to make sure that he wouldn't starve. However, that wasn't the only issue that the locals had to worry about. Winters in Russia can be extremely severe, with several feet of snow collecting up overnight and temperatures well below freezing. It was during the first of these winters, with the snow falling rapidly for several days, that some of the townspeople noticed just how determined Mishka was to stay at his spot. Instead of looking for a warm and dry place to shelter himself from the blizzard, the dog just curled up into as small a ball as he could and waited on the street like always. At one point, one of the people who liked to help the canine went over to make sure that he was okay, only to discover that Mishka was almost hypothermic with cold and in desperate need of medical attention. The helpful volunteer quickly rushed the pup to the local vet, where it was determined that he would need to stay for a couple of days to warm up and regain his strength. However, as soon as he was deemed healthy enough, Mishka took the chance to escape and return to his spot on the street. Not wanting the dog to suffer like that again, some volunteers decided to make the canine his very own little hut so that he would have somewhere safe and warm to sleep whilst still being close to his spot. Mishka was incredibly grateful and used the shelter every night. But whilst the canine stayed and waited for his owner, he also helped out anyone he thought might need it. One day, he was sitting in his usual spot when he saw a small child running down the opposite side of the road. Curious as to what was happening, Mishka watched as the boy tripped over. Just then, a wild dog came bounding up to the child, snarling and baring its teeth. Just before the strange canine could harm the boy, though, Mishka jumped to his rescue. The large wolf dog began growling at the wild dog and even moved as if to attack it. Frightened, the dog turned around and ran away. Once the danger was gone, Mishka turned to look at the kid and even licked him on his face as if to give reassurance to the child that he would be okay. The dog then stuck with the young boy and walked him along the street until they could hear his mother shouting his name. Once the boy was reunited with his mother, Mishka simply returned to his street and sat down patiently to wait for his owner. After this amazing act of heroism, the locals of the village said in an interview about the canine that, "I feel that Mishka is like the guardian of our town. Every time something happens, Mishka will come, which makes me feel very safe." As the years went by, Mishka never once strayed away from his spot on the street, content to wait for his owner as he had loved him with all his heart and truly believed that the man would be back to find him once again. But as all living things do, as the time went by, Mishka began to get older and older, until finally the inevitable happened. It was the winter of 2017. Mishka was 13 years old when some of the locals noticed something strange. They were walking down Mishka's street one day, but they did not see the canine in his usual spot. Thinking that perhaps the dog had simply taken himself on a little walk somewhere, the people passed by relatively unconcerned. But after a couple of days with no sign of the pup, the locals got increasingly worried. Eventually, a couple of people decided to check Mishka's little hut to see if the dog was okay. Sadly though, as they approached the shelter, they realized what had happened. The old pup had tragically passed away. Whilst it was a sad occasion, the locals couldn't help but be happy for the dog as well, as he was finally able to be reunited with his beloved owner once again. The locals buried the dog not too far from his spot on the street and even made a little plaque for him, which they attached to a nearby tree. And even though it was sad that the canine had moved on, the locals knew that they had looked after him as best that they could in his remaining years. It was thanks to these people that the dog always had something to eat and drink and somewhere warm to sleep. But now he would be able to get all of those things with his human once they met again in the afterlife. What a beautiful, if not slightly sad story. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible tales. And if you can't wait until then, you can head on over to my channel to find even more amazing stories.